I guess, but they don't have the bottom favor
What are the
score.
So I guess we'll talk about.
That's on, like, the performance is on, they could watch the performance.
On YouTube.
I send them performance for that one as well.
Cool. And maybe because they don't have the score, that could be interesting one to talk about.
We're getting close to an hour. I'll jump in and be like, hey, time to wrap it up. But yeah, I don't think there's any pressure, really. It's just kind of we're trying to that out and
Do you have anything specific that you would like people to kind of hear about, or?
I'm curious. I'm excited. I think having a conversation one can bring it to another. Questions you're curious about. Feel free to answer it.
Cool.
These are a lot of value that
Yeah.
hearing you talk about your experiences, your perspective, your approach.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Well, and feel free to like chime in with anything that you feel like, oh, this is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Mic check. Yeah, again.
Whatever you need to do.
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, I think the big thing for me is just like, practical application stuff. Just kind of be curious with it. And how to, yeah, just kind of how to put those in practice. An experience to grow.
Yeah.
That's kind of the main thing I have in my mind.
Yeah.
That I would like them to get out of it. I guess it's just being like, just kind of do a lot of it.
Just do it.
And yeah, talking about your musical kind of training and yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
I
Yeah.
get to wear these.
Maybe he's like the best underwater folk duo. Yeah.
teaching up at
Check.
Columbia?
Teaching. Check 1, 2.
Check 1, 2.
Now.
So I might lower this so my feet touch the floor.
All right, Nick, you get to call it. When you're ready. Cool.
Cool. Hello. I'm here today with a wonderful composer, Mary Kouyoumdjian. The New York Times has called her music eloquently scripted and emotionally racking. And she's received commissions from the Kronos Quartet, Alarm Will Sound, Brooklyn Youth Chorus, WQXR, and Carnegie Hall. Her music has tackled some pretty gigantic issues such as gender inequality, the Armenian genocide, and the Lebanese Civil War. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, musical training, where you're from, influences?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm currently based here in Brooklyn, New York, though I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. My background in music growing up was sort of similar to what a lot of kids had, where my parents forced me to take piano lessons, and for a long period of time I really hated those piano lessons, and then something shifted, and I started to enjoy it. Took organ lessons growing up. I got into composition because I started studying jazz in high school, and my teacher was encouraging me to do a lot of arrangements and improvising, and he also, I was a really lucky teenager, he also had a studio with what was Cakewalk, which doesn't exist anymore, but is like a music sequencing program similar to Logic. And we sort of just tinkered around in that, and through that I got interested in film scoring. So I went to study film scoring. I got my undergraduate, my Bachelor of Arts at UC San Diego in composition, then my master's in film scoring at NYU. moved to LA for a few years and did film scoring and worked in the film industry. Then realized I missed writing for concert music so much, and I missed New York quite a lot. So I moved back to New York and have been doing concert music ever since.
Wonderful. And what about influences for your music? Kind of source material or non-musical influences? What are kind of what really resonates with you and gets you excited?
Well, my family background and my heritage is a big influence on my music, both narratively and also as far as musical material. I'm Armenian, and my great-grandparents went through the Armenian genocide in Turkey. So topics of genocide and displacement from home really resonate with me. And also my parents and my brother are from Beirut, Lebanon, and they were refugees from the Lebanese Civil War. So their story is also really influential on me too. So topics about wartime genocide, refugees, immigration, specifically in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, really play a large role in my music. And also the folk music from those regions is all over
Yeah.
my music, if not directly as a quote, just influenced by that sort of tonal language.
Okay, awesome. And do you kind of is this as it's a very like relevant right now region of the world,
Yeah.
and do you kind of find you're able to really engage with like kind of contemporary issues by incorporating so much influence of it in your music?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that the refugee crisis in Syria and other refugee crises are a really big topic right now. And sort of in the past couple of years, I've been exploring these more contemporary issues. The Lebanese Civil War was finished in the 90s, and the Armenian genocide was 100 years ago. But those conflicts from those two instances just continue to resonate in more modern situations. So I'm actually working on a piece for the Brooklyn Youth Chorus and International Contemporary Ensemble on the Syrian refugee crisis. And I'm really interested in how youth today sympathizes with this crisis that they're learning about. So I showed the kids in the chorus a whole bunch of pictures that have just been circulating in the media and asked them to respond to those images. These are all images of Syrian refugees and mostly children. And their responses were really interesting, everything from wanting to help to really wanting to be hands-off, which is surprising, but honest.
Right.
And those responses are now the libretto of their piece. So I think these are just issues that aren't going away and we need to be talking about more openly.
So using music as a way of just creating a dialogue about past, present issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really great about music is that it can be indirect. Like you can talk about these issues. It's good to talk about these issues in a direct way, but also having musical material that approaches these sort of controversial political issues in an indirect way, I think allows people to just be a little more open when they're listening. So what I don't want to do in these pieces is say, this is exactly my political stance on something. I want to let there be a little bit of room for people who are undecided in the audience to come to their own opinions.
Yeah.
So for example, in Bombs of Beirut, if you guys have listened to Bombs of Beirut,
wonderful. Go listen if you
please
haven't.
listen. I didn't want to bring up anything about it being a war, like a holy war, that it's the people that are talking, you don't know if they're Christian or if they're Muslim, because it's more important to me that they're hearing these stories just person to person.
Right.
What is it like to live through wartime?
Yeah, right, which is, I think, something that, a lot of Americans maybe don't have direct experience with. And that's so using the kind of ambiguity of music to just kind of engage with these very complex
Mhm.
issues.
Yeah.
That's very, and I guess also kind of in doing so, creating this kind of recorded history, because you use a lot of recorded testimonials and interviews in your actual music.
Mhm.
That's a very cool thought to me of creating this kind of artifact in each piece.
Yeah, well, I think also the process, well, so for me, composing a piece
Mhm.
is like 90% the brainstorming and the setting up for the piece, and then like 10% writing for the actual
Okay.
piece. So what's happened is the process of actually interviewing these people or licensing interviews and doing research and talking to different libraries to see if they have these interviews. Doing that before even thinking about what I want the piece to be has been really helpful in structuring the piece later.
Okay.
Because these are big issues, so I think I don't know, research is so important. Research before you start the piece is really important if you're going to write a piece about something extra musical.
Right. Right. Making sure that you've kind of done the deep digging. Well, I guess that in terms of your process and fusing or blending just these or addressing these very deeply personal to you and to your family issues with like these technical skills, like an understanding of orchestration and music theory, and then with the electronics aspect, that technological issues, and now research too, digging into the archives or just doing the research work. How do you kind of using these technical or not technical, but different skills to really bring to life this very creative, personal music?
How do I do it?
Or I guess that's a hard question to answer, but does that inspire you and help you to, do you ever get bogged down by non, like, creative, or I don't know,
Yeah.
I guess they're not non-creative, but
I mean, something that bogs me down writing, I'll very honestly admit, is the notation.
notation.
part. Notation is, for me, limiting because, so notation is the last step for me.
Okay.
So I'll map out the piece, I'll draw my charts, plot out where I want certain ideas to come through, or where the most intense moment of the piece is, all like pacing, all of that. And then I do work primarily in Logic. So, and I think because I come from film scoring, I create my mock-ups first. So making MIDI mock-ups with these virtual sound libraries, or I have a number of instruments that I play very badly at home. So I'll even record in the parts live, and I'll do the entire piece start to finish in a mock-up and then start notating. And what happens is, and I'm sure a lot of us get frustrated doing this, is you have this amazing idea in your head, this amazing sound world, and then you don't know how to put that to paper.
Right.
And a lot of the times there isn't a set way how to put that to paper, so you have to create your own notation for that. So for me, that's the hurdle, but that just takes time.
Right.
And also something that's been really helpful for me is, if I know the performers that I'm writing for, which hopefully that's the scenario, then I can talk to those performers and say, this is the sound that I want. How would you like to see that notated?
Right.
And that just, if you're writing a piece for strings, to talk to a violinist or a violist or whatever,
Good. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, you said we were talking about saving notation for the end. That's not necessarily something I would recommend for everyone. That's just the way that I work.
Your process.
Yeah.
And do you think, so does that allow you to kind of almost, what's the word, like kind of divide your time into writing and then notating? Okay.
Sorry, technical issues. Yeah, I definitely have a process that I do for every piece, which is the brainstorming, the research, the making the mock-up, just trying sounds. I really rely on playback. I'm just not one of those composers where I just write it and I can hear the score. I wish I were, but I'm not. So playback is really, really helpful for me, and that includes I'll make MP3s of how far I've gotten in the piece, and I'm on the train all the time, so I'll listen to those MP3s over and over again, and that's actually helpful too, to listen to your piece away from your computer in different contexts. And then the last step, is that notation. But what's really great about saving notation for the end for me is that through making these mock-ups, I've sort of written my large gestures, my large structure, and then once I put it to paper, I can be a little more specific in the orchestration. I can change things around on these kind of microscopic details and actually see the piece in a different way. You can see how densely you've orchestrated something, or if you need page turns somewhere, then you can take some material out. So that's sort of how I work.
Very cool. And you mentioned incorporating kind of multiple instruments into your writing process. What do you find helpful about that?
Multiple instruments within strings or within other families of?
You're a pianist yourself, or you're trained at the piano?
Did I play different instruments?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So playing different instruments is really helpful. Again, I'm not very good at any of them except for piano and organ.
That's your primary.
Yeah, I'll brag. I'm pretty good at this. Actually, I'm fine. But something I just did as a kid was I just geeked out over different instruments, and I was really lucky that I had an older brother who was in band, so I got his hand-me-downs, and then just would get used instruments, and my dad was really supportive, and he'd bring something home, which I know is a very lucky circumstance. So growing up as a kid, I got to play flute, piccolo, French horn, saxophones, clarinet, all those different things, and just learning how to play them a little bit, what that does is it sort of tells you what's not in the orchestration book. So in an orchestration book, it'll say, the clarinet ranges from here to here, but often it doesn't tell you, it really speaks well here. It's a little airy here, but maybe that's a good thing if you want a more hollow sound. It's really shrieky and hard to play pianissimo up here. It doesn't really always tell you those things, but in playing those instruments, you sort of discover what works and what doesn't work. Also, for wind instruments, it's been really helpful because then I also know how much breath someone can sustain. So if I have a line and I'm trying it myself, they can probably do it a little longer because they probably have stronger diaphragms as professionals, but probably not much longer.
It gives you a rough approximation.
Yeah, an approximation. And for strings...
Sorry, guys. Can we just move you closer to the mic? We're getting some comments that...
Sorry. Sound.
Okay.
Sound is a little...
low.
Sure. Hopefully this is better.
Better?
We can speak up, too.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And for strings, when I was in college, I went on eBay and I just bought a really cheap cello. Not a good cello, but one of those cheap mass-produced in some factory cellos for just $200. My case for my cello is more expensive than the cello itself. And that was insanely helpful, just having the physical instrument that vibrates, to try different, what does it sound like when the bow is close to the bridge? What does it sound like when it's on the fingerboard? How fast can someone do pizzicato? Or what is an actual bow length? How much time can that take? And That's helped all of my string writing, actually.
So getting that real tactile understanding of the instrument by trying to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
also talking to your friends.
Talking to friends, yeah. So if you don't have these instruments and if you can't borrow them, although ask around, because even if you just have, a viola with you for a week, that's going to be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have access to these instruments, talk to the musicians. Maybe take someone out to lunch and ask for a workshop or something.
Yeah.
Or if you could give them a little honorarium, even better. But yeah, just having the live sound instead of the Sibelius playback or the finale playback is really, really important.
Yeah. And with wind, you mentioned, with wind instruments, you mentioned the kind of breath, getting that real firm understanding of how much breath the player can have.
Mm-hmm.
And you listed a few things that with, considerations on the strings. Has there been any kind of major thing that just took you a really long time to figure out, or to kind of a problem that you kept running into with writing for string instruments that just kind of...
Yeah, double stops. Double stops. Yeah, actually, okay, so double stops are tricky because you want just any double stop, but then you actually have to see what that looks like on the instrument.
Yeah.
And then if you have a series of double stops, like if you want parallel octaves, that doesn't mean that their finger position is staying the same in that octave as they move throughout the length of the instrument. That's changing, it's widening or narrowing. So having the instrument to try out the fingerings and see, can the hand actually physically stretch that far? And I have a small hand, so if mine can do it, hopefully theirs can. Also, I don't have a violin at home, but I have a mandolin, which is the same string structure and generally about the same size. So sometimes I'll actually take my mandolin and put it up to my chin and see, is this possible? And then some things need a little adjusting when you put it to violin, of course. But little workarounds like that, I think, are really helpful. Yeah,
and again, that just, physically doing it yourself to really put yourself in the mind of the player. Mm-hmm. I do that with double stops. I'm a guitarist, and I will tune my guitar in fifths just to get a sense of what will this be like on a kind of smaller neck.
Yeah.
And that's been very helpful.
Well, I've never thought to do that, but a lot of us have guitars at home.
Yes.
So,
many people have a guitar.
Yeah. Just don't pop your string if you're tuning
it
kind of strangely.
Yes. Be careful with that. Cool. And what about incorporating folk music? What do you find, like, so many composers take folk music as kind of source material or inspiration in their own music, but then it is such a different practice of kind of learning by ear, or it's a very social, very community-based thing. Not that classical music isn't, but taking such influences and then figuring out how to kind of notate them or adapt them for this world.
Yeah.
What are some resources for kind of exploring that world, or what has been helpful for you?
Sure. I'm not sure if I know of any resources. If anyone knows of any resources, I would like to read them as well. It's sort of been a lot of self-experimentation. So one of the tricky things with putting folk music in contemporary music is, there are two ways you could do it. One way is you just have elements of the folk melody or harmonies or whatever, and you're asking them to play it in a contemporary Western kind of way, and that's fine. For me and my music, I really want them to sound like folk players, even if the language is a little more contemporary.
Right.
And the challenge in that is that in folk music, there are a lot of things that are in between what's actually notated. Mm-hmm. So if I have this beautiful Armenian folk melody from the early 1900s, the way it would be performed is there would be a lot of like microtonal glissandi bending into the notes.
Right.
These wide vibratos. If they're a string player, there might be a little more grit on the attack of the bow. It's just imperfect. And in ensemble performance, things wouldn't necessarily be perfectly aligned, perfectly in tune. And these are challenges when I'm asking new music performers to play these things.
Right.
But what that means is I have to be very specific in my notation. So I have to actually notate these microtonal glissandi that wouldn't normally be there,
Right.
but I have to tell them this is where it's existing. I often put notes at the beginning of the piece saying, you don't have to play perfectly in time. You can be out of tune. Don't be obsessed with playing perfectly in tune. And I'll sometimes have little notes that say this should sound like this recording, and then hopefully they'll listen to a recording and get an idea of what that sound is.
Get a sense of the kind of nuances of that musical language.
Yeah.
Very cool. So kind of a combination of very, very detailed instruction for certain moments and just kind of general, like, listen to this and, general instructions about kind of how to...
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. What about starting a new piece or choosing, like, deciding what you're going to write about?
That's a big one.
Question. Sorry.
Well, so there are two circumstances that I've been faced with in the past few years. One is someone will approach me for a commission and they actually have a very specific idea of what they want written. And that can be challenging because if the commissioner doesn't actually really know your music, they might be asking you to do something that's not part of your musical identity, or maybe you're not the best composer for that. So then the challenge is, if you're taking that gig, how to find yourself in what they're asking for. And I can actually give an example that hopefully doesn't get me into any trouble. But I was recently commissioned to write a piece addressing Romani members who went through the Holocaust. And that was something that I didn't feel very comfortable with because, I don't have family that went through the Holocaust, and I'm always a little concerned about appropriation. But my workaround for that was that I'm creating a portrait piece about one person who is an artist and a survivor, and a Romani musician who went through the Holocaust, and I'm writing a piece where the movements are structured around her paintings. And that's something I can relate to because she's an artist and she's an individual and a musician, and I'm exploring her story. But it can be challenging when they give you something specific to write about. The other circumstance is when someone just says, we want you to write a piece for this ensemble, and that is the most amazing feeling ever. And also can be challenging because you're like, ooh, what are we going to read about? And for me, a lot of my inspiration does come from, like we mentioned earlier, these sort of current events of political or social issues in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, and that's sort of broadening outside of those regions as well. So it's sort of whatever issues I'm really caring about at that moment or really interested in and want to explore. So really paying attention or looking for what really resonates with you personally and finding your angle and what you feel comfortable and confident to say. I mean, you have to care about what you want to say. People will know if your heart's not in it. And you know, when you're writing a piece, you're spending so much time with that material. So if you don't really love what you're writing for or writing about, if you're writing about something, then I think it just makes the process really difficult.
Absolutely. In terms of getting commissions or working with professional contemporary ensembles, do you have advice for young composers who how people can just start writing pieces, like whether it's putting a group of friends to, I don't know, how did you start having your music performed by other people?
First I started by performing my own pieces. So that was a lot of it. That was a lot of it, just writing pieces for solo piano or solo piano and track, and then having those recordings in that library so I could show people this is my voice, this
Right.
is what I do, would you consider working with me? And then what was really great about being at UC San Diego was that the general philosophy of the school was that as students you work on each other's pieces,
Right.
so you perform on each other's pieces, and I think that philosophy is shared by a lot of musicians. So if you just know another musician, I mean, it's really as a performer, it's really flattering if a composer comes up to you and says, I want to write a piece for you.
Right.
Like catered to you and your playing style and your interests and all of that. So just ask your friends if you can write a piece for them. And if you know ensembles or bands, you can also approach them too.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do it, just do your research, because you don't want to just go up to an ensemble and say, I just want to write a piece for you. Like you really have to sort of pitch why you're a good fit for that ensemble, why your piece would contribute something to their rep, and know something about their players and the material that they like playing. But just ask. Don't be shy. Just ask. Just nicely ask.
Yes. Yes. And again,
Yeah.
friends and, people, just thinking about, who you know and just reaching out to them.
Yeah.
And kind of learning by experience. And
Yeah.
by doing.
And also going to each other's shows, like actually making an in-person appearance that says, I'm supporting the work that you're doing, Ensemble X,
Yeah.
is really helpful. And then they get to know you already through that experience. And then
Right.
you're not just like cold calling them
Right.
when you reach out to them.
Yeah. And maybe would be more inclined to help support your work by either
Totally.
performing or, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, very cool. Well, are there any questions that we can open it up to the...
We've got 3 questions so far.
Okay, cool. Let's see.
Let's try.
Ooh, okay. This first one says, which techniques and structure are your favorite, and have you compared Japanese contemporary music? And if you do, what did you find different? I guess in comparison to...
To maybe Eastern European or Middle Eastern.
Right.
Well, so while I do very much enjoy Japanese contemporary music, although just admittedly, I haven't tried incorporating many of those techniques into my own music, not because I don't appreciate and respect the practice, but more because of what I mentioned a little earlier with appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little hesitant to bring in elements of other cultures into my own music because I'm not sure that I'm the appropriate person to do that. But that doesn't mean you can't explore those sounds or techniques. But I guess I'm just careful. But the first part of the question, which techniques and structure are your favorite? Okay. As far as structure, I just love through composed music, because I think, if we're just taking life, there aren't a lot of repeats in life. Like you're moving, things are changing, they're always moving forward. And I like that about music too. I don't necessarily feel that there needs to be a large return to where you started in a piece, like at the end, like a recap to go back. That said, I think nostalgia and familiarity are really important in music. As far as giving listeners landmarks to listen for, or just, familiarity
Things to
just
latch
feels
onto.
good.
Yes.
Yeah. So having elements that do repeat,
Right.
that definitely happens in my music. As far as techniques, if we're talking strings, because this is string central,
Stringland.
I love just gritty, kind of like nasty sounds on strings. So anything that like crunches, like overpressure on the bow, or like molto sul ponticello, where you're just getting, that's when the bow is close, I guess, the bow is close to the bridge, and you're just getting all of those textures and harmonics and overtones and all of that like good juicy stuff. And even, although I don't ask string players to do this a lot, because every string player doesn't want to do an extended technique on their instrument because their instruments are worth tens of thousands of dollars. But one of my favorites is if you turn if I have a violin and I turn it backwards and I have the back of the violin is rolling the hairs of the bow
Ooh.
on the back, and that just gets like a kind of like almost like bones crunching kind of sound. It's a little morbid, but it's really cool.
Very cool.
So some string players will do it if it's like a cheaper instrument and cheaper bow.
Yeah.
So those are some of my favorites.
So the crunchier
sounds.
The sounds.
Crunchier, yeah.
Cool.
I like the not pretty sounds.
Yes. And did you see the public quartet's improvisation?
I didn't on Colbert.
Yeah. They did a lot of there was a lot of kind of crunchy, slidey stuff at moments.
Yeah.
Which was very good.
Well, I think also maybe all of these techniques that they have in common is there are sounds that remind me of electronic music because I really like working with electronics. So these are sounds that make me think of distortion or like granular synthesis or something that just kind of changes things up. So I am interested in acoustic sounds that do sound electronic.
Okay. And what about what kind of electronic sounds do you like?
Distortion.
Okay.
Distortion, really heavy reverb, which works well with strings because you can control the decay. Like a wind instrument, like a trumpet, it's really hard to go from forte to niente. At some point, it just kind of stops. But with the string, you can really control the decay and how long you want that decay to be. So I'll try to mimic those types of reverb effects in the string writing too.
Okay, interesting. So kind of mimicking acoustic sounds with electronics and vice versa, or kind of just
maybe not vice versa. Like maybe the electronic sounds aren't mimicking the acoustic sounds.
Okay.
They're electronic.
Right.
But the acoustic instruments, well, this comes from, so a lot of my music does have electronics and acoustic instruments in it. And for me, when those two sound worlds sound very far apart, it becomes problematic. It's not problematic in general, it's just my own preference. I want to feel like they're cohesive.
Right.
So anything I can do with the live instruments to get them closer to that electronic sound sort of brings that sound world together.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I don't work too much with electronics, so that's uncharted territory for me.
Get it.
I should. Okay. Back to double stops. Do you know of any written resources? I guess we talked about kind of, getting a tactile sense of on either a string instrument or...
Yeah. There's... Samuel Adler has...
Yeah, he has the charts in the...
Yeah, and I think it's just called Orchestration, his book.
Yeah.
For each string instrument, he has the breakdown of the notes on each string, so you could kind of imagine what the double stops might be. Also, a book I really like is Kurt Stone's book called, I think, just Notation. And that book sort of covers... It's an older book, so it covers a lot of extended techniques, but maybe not something in the past few years, because there's been a lot more experimentation on what instruments can do in the past 10 years or so. But as far as like some of these extended techniques that we were talking about, they're all in there and they're all notated very well. So I'd look at that book as well.
Yeah, cool. I don't know that book, so
That's great.
I'm gonna check it out. We got some more. Okay, how much is Mary involved when the piece is actually performed? Do you just hand over the music to the conductor without being involved in getting the sound you were really after?
My preference is to always be very involved. That said, there are scenarios where I just am not involved with the premiere whatsoever, and I don't have access to the performer before. So in those instances, it's really important that you notate very specifically as though you're not going to be in the same room with the performer. So say everything you need to say in the score. And that's just in general good practice because it helps save time in rehearsals. There are kind of unnecessary questions if you're specific in the score. Also, in those situations, I try to get a recording of a rehearsal or maybe Skype in if possible. But ideally, I'm part of the rehearsal process. Maybe not the first rehearsal because people need to kind of iron things out on their own.
Right.
But I'm part of the rehearsal process. I'm definitely part of the sound check. And since, I mean, electronics can just be unpredictable. And when you're working with electronics, things just sound different in venue to venue. Mm-hmm. So I'm the type of composer that will sit at the mixing board, which is sometimes welcomed by sound engineers and sometimes not welcomed by sound engineers. But if it's a premiere and the sound engineer has never worked on the piece, then I'm generally there to say, I need the track a little louder. I need more reverb on the strings. Those types of things.
So ideally, as involved as possible.
Yeah.
While figuring out how to say as much as possible in this written score.
Yeah, and I think most performers welcome that. I mean, we're living composers. It's very different from when they practice their classical rep, where you don't get to ask Beethoven what he intended in a moment, but we're living, we're breathing, we have thoughts. We're the only ones who really know what the piece is supposed to sound like. Mm-hmm. So I think performers want to talk about what's happening in the score and get it to the sound that we want it to be.
Right. Okay. Oh, we kind of talked about that already. Just in terms of getting a general idea and then process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once I have that general idea, like I mentioned earlier, for me recently it's been current social or political issues. Then it's just a lot of meditating on the idea, doing research, planning the piece, the structure of the piece, and then trying out sounds in Logic. So recording sounds into the computer. These are good questions.
Yeah. Okay, this one is about atonal writing, kind of outside of, I guess, a major key. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay. So do I write atonally? And the answer is in moments. I am a loud and proud tonal composer, which in contemporary music can be a dying aesthetic. Well, I guess depending on your school of thought, some people are really, for some reason, against tonality because it's tonal and it is sympathetic with pop culture. I think that's just silly, and I love pop music. Yeah. But you're right. Atonality does sort of free up some things, in that you're no longer concerned with your tonal centers or scales or modes, and you can just sort of focus on timbre and sound and rhythm. For me, like 90% of my piece will be tonal because that's the language I like working in. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the audience that I'm writing for, is an audience that likes tonal music. But I will have atonal moments, so moments that are more like soundscapes or sort of ambiguous. But I guess what I'd say is you don't necessarily need to pick one or the other. Just right. I mean, there are always like these weird like bipolar schools of thought for some reason. But if you enjoy atonality and you enjoy tonality, just find ways to integrate both. Right. In a piece or in different pieces.
On that subject, I guess, what about improvisation? You mentioned improvising as a kind of, that was something that really helped you when you were first discovering writing music. What do you find helpful about improvising?
Sure. In the writing process, I mean, all of it's really improvisation. So before I start recording into the computer, sometimes I just sit away from the computer with my cello or at the piano. I take my smartphone and there's like the recording memo app, and I find that really helpful because I'll just like improvise at the instrument, just try out ideas, sing a little bit, whatever I need to, and record it on there. And then hopefully if there's like a golden nugget in there, then I'll take it later. Yeah, I have it, but at least there's sort of a freedom in trying ideas out away from the computer, because the computer for me, I know it's not a permanent medium, you could delete things, but something about sitting at the computer feels official. Like I have my idea, I'm going to lay it into the computer. But being at an instrument means I'm gonna just try things out. Some things are gonna sound great. Some things are gonna sound really bad. But yeah, all of that really is through improvisation.
Cool. Okay, let's see what else we got. Do performers ever have an approach you prefer? I guess if you give a piece to an ensemble and they interpret it differently than you would have, can you think of a time that has been a positive experience?
Oh, it's been a positive experience. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, well, let me look at this again. Do performers ever have an approach you prefer? Okay, so if the question is meaning their interpretation of the piece, sometimes, like for instance, I just had a piece performed by this group called Alarm Will Sound, and I basically notated what I wanted, but I had told them also, if you have better ideas, like if there are moments where you want to take more liberties, try different ornamentations, things that just feel natural to you on your instruments, go for it. And then when I came to the rehearsal, they had done quite a lot of it, but it sounded really great. Like these are things I never would have notated. But it was very surprisingly pleasant. And in fact, something I've sort of done recently is that if I have, say, like 2 rehearsals with an ensemble, have the majority of the first and second rehearsal be performing it as written, and then have like another take where I say, now just try stuff that's off the page. That doesn't mean like riff on your own cadenza or something, but like just try things that you think
take a little more
would be are more you. And sometimes you really like those ideas, sometimes you don't, and you could say tone it back. But for those ideas that you like, then you could go back in your piece and, with their permission, of course, change some things, notate things a little differently to get that sound that you liked.
And I guess that goes back to researching who you're writing for and really knowing your ensemble. And if you're writing for an ensemble that you really trust and want them to want their input, I guess, more. I don't know, that could be.
Yeah, and I think input from the performers is really important because you don't want them to feel like the hired help. Like that they're just like there to just please you. Just play whatever you've written. They're human beings, and it's a gift that we get to talk to them and asking for their input. Even asking for their input, maybe could I have notated things differently? Was something awkward for you? Did I write something that was awkward for you to play? Or like I've written a lot of like stuff with harmonics for string players, and I've notated it in a way that I think makes sense. But then oftentimes string players will say, well, actually, it's much easier for me to get that harmonic on this spot on the instrument, and I would notate it this way. So that's really helpful. That feedback.
And that helps you figure out how to write in a way that's more enjoyable for players to play.
You want them to want to play it.
Yes, absolutely. Which digital instrument libraries work better for your technical ideas?
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if they necessarily work better for my technical ideas, but I'll just say the 2 libraries that I work primarily with, which are East West and Vienna. They're just sort of symphonic libraries, and they'll have all of the symphonic instruments, and then for each instrument, say if you click on violin, solo violin, it'll have like the pizzicato sound, marcato, legato, like all these different options, sul ponticello, all these different things. So then you can actually kind of hear what these sounds are like when you're recording them in. The problem with a lot of symphonic libraries is that sometimes the range that they give you is inaccurate. So like you can have a bassoon sound way up on like the last key of the piano, but a bassoonist actually couldn't play that note. But because it's a library and it's just MIDI, it'll happen. So you still have to be on top of your orchestrational range knowledge.
Talk to humans.
Talk to humans, look at the orchestration book.
I guess this has to do with conductors' interpretations of pieces, which I guess...
I've been really lucky. Well, so do I ever get disappointed with how a conductor interprets the piece? I've been really lucky in that I've worked with really great conductors, and conductors that I know really well and that know my music. And I think that part of that luck comes from a lot of pre-rehearsal conversation. So once you deliver the score, get on the phone with the conductor, talk about your piece, talk about the aesthetic of the piece, the sounds that you want, the feel of the piece, because they will interpret it how they want to interpret it. And also in rehearsal, don't be afraid to talk to the conductor, but again, politely, because there's this etiquette, you don't want to say to the conductor that they're doing something wrong in front of the ensemble, because they respect the conductor. And also, actually, that brings up too, when you are in rehearsal, some groups will be very informal, where if there's a conductor, you can still talk to the performers, like, hey, Joe on violin, I'd like you to try something differently. In some ensembles, all of this really needs to be fed through the conductor. So you say the comment to the conductor, I need the violin to do this, and then the conductor delivers the comment to the violinist.
Right.
So sort of gauge the energy, the pecking order of the group.
And what about conducting in general? Have you conducted your own pieces, and what about gaining conducting experience? I mean, just because I always find conducting is such a mysterious thing to people.
I've conducted my own pieces out of necessity.
Right.
So if I've already scheduled the rehearsals, there's a conductor I really want to work with, but they can't make the first rehearsal, then I'll conduct that rehearsal. But generally, I'm a fan of not conducting my own pieces, because I really want to prioritize my role as listening,
right,
like sort of from the outside, so I can give feedback. And I think that's really hard to do when you're in the middle of the ensemble.
Yeah, to get that perspective.
Yeah, and also you're performing, you're conducting. You already have a lot that you're thinking about logistically. So yeah, I like to be removed from that situation.
Have those situations helped you to understand how to better communicate with conductors, or?
Yeah, well, what those situations do is they reveal how much needs to be in the score. And also, actually, you know what? It's more revealing the types of questions that the performers are asking the conductor and the things that they say that they need. So, like, it's really difficult for me to go from measure 4 to measure 5. I need a little more time. And that's something they would say to the conductor, but not necessarily to the composer.
Right.
But then as a composer, you get to learn, I need to give them a little time to go from this technique to this technique, or this area of the instrument to this area of the instrument. So, yeah, I think it's helpful.
Cool. What about, this question is, how did you get your first commission? Advice for newbie trying to get into that.
Sure. Well, my first paid commission, let's say first paid commission, was through an opportunity that I applied for. There's this really wonderful organization called American Composers Forum, and they're a really great resource for finding. Actually, everyone should sign up and be a member. It's like $70 a year, so you have to pay something. But being a member to ACF means that you have access to their catalog of commissioning opportunities and competitions and calls for scores. And they have just hundreds of them. And they had their own opportunity called the American Composers Forum J Fund, which is for emerging composers. So these are composers that haven't quite established themselves yet, but are looking for an opportunity to write something for an ensemble. And they provide a commissioning fee for you to do that. And that was insanely helpful for me. I really didn't have much of a rep before applying for that, but they took a chance. And then since then, just sort of getting that first commission led to getting other commissions. It's like once you get that first one, some type of credibility gets assigned onto you, and then other people are more willing to take that risk. But a commission doesn't necessarily mean it has to be paid. It could just be a performer who's interested in having you write something for them. So in that case, visibility and, again, getting to know performers, making sure they get to know your music is really important.
Right. And again, with the not waiting until you're paid to do it, it's like you can still say, I've had a this group commission it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and again, that helps bring about
Yeah.
future opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, when you put these commissions on your resume, you're never putting. You
How
should
much?
never put how much you were commissioned
Right,
for.
right.
One for yourself and also for the organization.
Yes.
So it's not revealing. So if you're getting these commissions that aren't necessarily paid at the start, then it doesn't matter. Like it's on your resume. You've done it. But yeah, the most important thing I think when you're starting out is just writing a lot of pieces and having them performed and building that library.
Mm-hmm. And with that J Fund piece, was that one of those kind of open-ended, do whatever you want kind of commissions, or was there something
Yeah.
more specific in mind?
I think that was a commission where a lot of the time when you apply for these types of competitions, they ask for a proposal or like an artist statement. So I proposed a piece that I wanted to write. I want this piece to be about X. I want to write it for this ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
If I get the funding for this, I am planning on performing it at this venue at this time of year. And these are things that can change. It's as much detail and specifics that you have at the moment
Right.
that's really helpful to put in because it shows that you've thought this through.
Thought through it, yeah.
And then people are more likely to invest in you.
Mm-hmm.
But those also aren't contracts.
Right.
So if you get the commission and then you want to change what it's about, you talk to them. Generally, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I think, is there, I think we've kind of touched on are there any more questions from the crew? No? Okay, well, I think we'll maybe wrap it up there.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions.
Yes.
Happy
wonderful
writing.
questions. Yeah. Good luck.